Mark Carney, who is he really? Is he China's Dr. Evil? Is he China's pawn who's come in here as a central banker to take over Canada? Hi, my name is Ross McLean. This is the McLean Chronicles. I'm a former law enforcement officer, a security specialist. I've done bodyguard work for billionaires. I've been around and I've seen behind the curtain a couple of times. I want to tell you about what's going on with Canada and why the US and Canadians should be particularly concerned. But first, a bit of breaking news. As we're looking here at China, I've done another video on it before. You can find it here about China's claws that have been put into Canada. It goes much deeper. We just had one of the Liberal parties, consider them the Democrats of Canada, under the leadership of Mark Carney, who's the new put-in Prime Minister for Canada. One of their members, a Chinese member from Hong Kong, who served on the police department in a local police department in the area, in a very, very, very Chinese populated part of outer Toronto. He just made a joke, I think really a veiled threat, to have other Chinese people turn in a conservative, if you will, Canadian Republican candidate, kidnap them, and turn them over to the Chinese. He literally said that. Now, this is someone who is a sergeant on the police force. He's Chinese. He's had a lot of work with the Chinese community. And now China, over with Hong Kong, since that breakup in Hong Kong, they've been chasing people down. And it turns out they've got $1 million Hong Kong bounty on the head of a conservative candidate. Why? Because he had a YouTube channel that talked against the government in Hong Kong. So they have a bounty out. And this Liberal MP, who's running again as a Liberal MP, talking in front of a Chinese audience, said, hey, anybody wants to make the $1 million, just pick them up and deliver them to the Chinese embassy. Now, this is very serious because, number one, there's been a lot of Chinese in that area that have been kidnapped, murdered, held for ransom, who are terrified of China coming back after them because they say something or they're disliked back in China. Canada had a whole interference investigation into foreign interference that was whitewashed. We got a real problem here, but here's the biggest thing. Carney, Dr. Evil, as I'm going to call him, has said nothing. He hasn't denounced this person for saying it. He hasn't asked for him to withdraw from the running. And this is serious. You know, I know as former law enforcement, I see it all the time, particularly in many ethnic communities. People who are law enforcement are treated like gods there. People brag about it. I got a friend who's on the police department. Oh my God, oh, he'll straighten something out for you. It's a real wedge of influence over there. But what I think he was also doing when he made that, I'm going to call it a veiled threat, is he was threatening everybody else in that audience. You do not mess with China. I don't care if you're on Canadian soil. And of course, Canada has issues with the police stations here, the Chinese police stations. You had them in the US. You actually convicted people down in the US for running them. They haven't in Canada. So what we're looking at is what is the real sovereignty for Canada going forward if your people can just be renditioned and threatened by politicians who are in the pocket of the Chinese for all we know. And by the way, we don't know. There's still 11 politicians on the Liberal Party, the Democrat Party, if you will, up here in Canada, that were implicated in the foreign interference of either wittingly or unwittingly working with China. It's a serious threat. But let's look at Mr. Carney. That's the real thing I wanted to make a video about before. That was just the cherry on top of the cake here. Who is Mr. Carney? And where did he come onto the scene? Well, he's been an old Goldman Sachs guy. He worked as a central banker in Canada. He worked as a central banker in England. But let me tell you, 2015 was his coming out party. That's when Mr. Carney came out and started working with the Chinese very, very closely. At the time, he was at the Bank of England, but he was also on the Financial Stability Board. That's a bunch of the group of 7, group of 20, G20 central bankers who all get together and they decide how banking should be done around the world. Carney was the head of that. And you want to know one of the central banks and one of the banks he was supposed to look after and write regulations on and work closely with was the Bank of China. Yes, he was working with the Chinese to help make the Chinese, to bring them into the fold, to bring them out so they could make money. Now, 2015 is an interesting year because at that time, China was having a big stock market collapse. And if you remember, it was the smog capital of the world. People couldn't breathe there. The videos came out of all the thick smoke and the fog and people wearing masks and how miserable it was. And China was considered the worst polluter on the planet. They still pretty much are. But aside from that, China decided the way that they were going to make their comeback was to get into environmental work and sustainable energy work, those sort of things. And they were going to work with Mark Carney to do it. How are they going to get there? Well, first of all, Mark Carney is the governor of the Bank of England. He decided he was going to promote the Chinese yuan as an alternative to dealing with the US dollar. He set up a $40 billion kitty of Chinese money being held by the Bank of England. So if people wanted to settle contracts in the Chinese dollar, if you will, they could do it much more easily. So here was Carney helping China there. Now, when it comes to going to the COP20, everybody remember that, the big pollution control meeting? This was the coup de grace for Carney. He was in there as the Bank of England, the Financial Stability Board, and at COP20, and they started going into the looking after carbon reduction. Do you remember all the demands that came out of there? Everybody was supposed to report their carbonization. All the countries were supposed to bring it down. Everybody was going to basically get their oil pipeline stepped on, except for China. China was to be given grace till 2030 or so, that they could still pollute as much as they want and not pay any penalties. Every other developed Western country, though, would pay big penalties. Mr. Carney helped to pave that one through. What did China do back in this time when Carney was working with them? They developed a whole region of China into basically the new green economy place where they built windmills and all sorts of green energy devices. And Mr. Carney, after that, ended up hooking up with Brookfield Management, Brookfield Assets. And what is Mr. Carney also a part of? Another group in Scotland called the GFANZ. It's all complicated, you can look it all up. But this was another group that was going to get all the banks together all around the world. And they were going to deny capital or capital at an increased rate to any company which did not reduce its carbon usage. First he said, you're all going to have to report it. You're all going to have to come up with a report and you're going to have to put it in. And if you don't reduce it, well, guess what? You're going to be punished. You won't have access to bank accounts. Much like Carney said to do to the Canadians during the convoy strike, he advocated for taking away the bank accounts of people. But Carney is also up, the US Congress is looking at this because they're calling it an energy cartel, where companies are being forced to reduce their carbon when it's of no interest to shareholders and no one's asking for it, only because of his group for doing it. How else does Carney tie into this? Well, his wife works for a group called the Eurasia Group, and she's also an advisor on a special energy fund. One of the companies that's owned in that energy fund, guess what they do? They will rate your company's carbon usage, and they'll put it out there so that you can do it. And Carney is even on record. He's on record when he put this stuff out, saying really that you're going to have to force companies to comply with this. He wants to use regulations and the power of the government in order to force people to comply with this. And what does he do at Brookfield Asset Management? He invests in all the companies that are all going to go up as soon as he gets the enforcement in and the laws in all the countries around the world. So this is Mark Carney's great Dr. Evil plan, really, to take over the world. I mean, that's what it sure looks like to me. Do the digging into his background yourself and find out where he sits. He's been in charge now, less than 2 weeks, and he's already threatened the U.S. He said the relationship is over.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
But then the next day, he's on a phone call with the Donald, and Trump says, we're going to get along just fine. And a little secret newsletter came out by the Eurasia Group that said Carney was going to fold on all of the fighting with the U.S. He just wants to get elected on fighting Trump. Then he's going to roll over. And who knows what he's going to do to Canada's natural resources. I think he's going to impoverish Canadians. I mean, I look at him and I see him in there as getting himself rich, not making Canadians rich. So this is China's grip right now on the government of Canada. It's on the northern border for the United States. You better be concerned about it, because he is all in, and all the money he's got is all based on China getting ahead. Let's watch for more. This is Ross McLean for the McLean Chronicles. Subscribe, follow, like. We'll see you next video.